right, good morning, art students. So today we are going to be looking at how to start expanding our first draft into our final draft. So I'm going back to my first draft just to review what quote I chose and kind of the image setup that I had. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I plan to do for my final and some things from my to-do list that I need to do to improve this piece to make it into a final draft. So this physical drawing will not become my final draft. This will just stay the first draft. I'm going to start my final draft on a separate sheet of paper, and use this as a guide as I'm working. So the quote that I chose was, "Happiness often sneaks in through a door you didn't know you left open." So just to review the imagery I chose kind of a darker room. It looked kind of like dark and sad and empty, but then all these little bubbles are just kind of tumbling out, kind of like in a cartoon that you might have watched. I feel like a lot of cartoons have this, where like if you open a closet, a bunch of toys and stuff come out or whatever. Same idea, where like just all these big happy things are kind of stumbling in. I originally thought I was gonna maybe draw the happy things or just use words in the light when I was doing one of my 3 thumbnails. I kind of was thinking out loud about that, but I thought maybe, all right, I'm going to include these little bubbles, and then I'm going to draw in what I see of these bubbles. I didn't draw them in for my first draft because I thought it would be a little too much, so I want to spend some time doing them on my final. For my final draft, some things that I want to consider, I am choosing to do mine. I like to work in acrylic paint, so I'm going to use acrylic paint. You can use whatever materials you have at home. You are not required to use color for your final draft. If you only have pencil and paper, then use pencil and paper. Just make sure you're putting in the effort to make it come up as a final draft as opposed to a second version of your first draft, if you don't have color. You're also welcome to use photography. So I showed you guys the toy photography last time. I'm going to put some additional resources up on Thursday for you to review on how to, maybe if you're doing some photography, how to set up a scene, as well as some additional resources on collage if that's what you want to do, in which case you're just going to combine different images to make your collage. So if I were to do that, I would find a picture of a door, or maybe I would make this door by ripping up little pieces of paper that match the colors that I want to show for the door, and then I could draw. You can also combine drawing with collage. You don't have to just do collage on its own, or drawing on its own, or painting on its own if you have paint. You can use whatever you have. Even for this, if I wanted to, I was looking for a canvas to do my final draft on. I can't find a canvas that's the size that I wanted. So I'm just going to use some heavier paper. But if I really wanted to, I could just use, the inside of a cardboard box, like a piece of cardboard to paint on. You can do whatever you want with the materials that you have. If you have questions too about what you want to be making your final draft out of, please let me know. I just want to see what you guys are thinking. If you need help brainstorming ideas about what to do, I'm happy to help. Just let me know what you want. All right, so I'm going to go into time-lapse mode of making this final draft of my quote, my positive quote, and hopefully you guys can kind of see how we develop from a first draft to a final. One thing I will say is, before I get started, I need to gather all my materials. Sometimes the most frustrating thing when you're in the middle of making a piece of artwork is having to go search for something that you didn't get, like if you forgot a certain color, or if you forgot your pencil sharpener, or if you decided you want to use different type of paper. So make sure you have and gather all your materials. All right, so I'm going to put this in time-lapse mode. I'm going to give you a little bit of info on how I get going on the final after I've shown you about half of it. Only half of the final draft will be due Friday, so I can give you some feedback before you complete it. I want to make sure there's time to give feedback on the work that you've done. So please, this is the one time you'll hear me say this, don't finish your work, only do about half of it. Okay. All right, one more thing. So I just want to show you my supplies. I have my paint right here. This is a palette that I use all the time. I cover it in plastic so I can save my paint from session to session every time I paint. You can see there's a lot of different colors mixed on there. It's kind of a mess, but it works for me. I also have my water cup with my brushes, so I'm ready when I need to change colors. I have my paper towel. I have all sorts of colors all over in the bin next to me. So just a little bit about how I do some color mixing just to get started. All right, some of this paint is okay, some of it is a little bit too dry, so I'm gonna remove some of the dry bits and then just use what I have here. All right, so I have shadow, a lot of shadow in my picture and a lot of light in my picture as well. When I look at light and shadow, I want to think about what looks the best color-wise. So shadows tend to be a little bit cooler, so I'm going to use some blues, and I'm going to use some golds and yellows for the lights. So I'm going to get my brush wet. I'm going to do what's called an acrylic wash. So basically what this does is I'm going to be using water with some of the acrylic paint, and I'm going to be kind of mapping out colors in more of a watered down format. Since I'm using just a paper, I'm not using a canvas, I don't want to go overboard with the water. This would be if I was using watercolor as well. Using too much water is going to make it so the paper can come apart, it can crumble, so you just want to be careful about how you do that. I'm going to just do a general kind of blue wash over the door because I want that to be in shadow. I'm not going to do the edge of the door right here that's like showing the thickness of the door because I think that would probably be hit by light. My 8th graders, you guys know all this from your still life unit, right? So you want to think about where the lights and darks are. The beauty about acrylic paint is that I am able to cover things over. So if I make a mistake, I can paint over. Watercolor, not so much. If I were to leave this as a transparent layer, this is it. This is all I get, okay? So I'm going to kind of map out where I would think the blue shadow would come here too. I'm kind of showing where the light would hit here. I might even have a little bit of light creeping underneath the door, so I could go back with my acrylic and make sure that happens. This area I think would be in shadow as well, so I'm going to make sure I map that out. All right. So all I'm trying to do right now is just map out some of the colors. Mixing colors is important. If you are using a different color system, like if you're using watercolor or color pencil, practice the colors on your first draft. So I could actually go back to my first draft here, and I could paint on here to kind of practice the colors before I move on to my final, especially with color pencil, markers, or crayons, just to make sure you like them before you go into your final. The worst thing that you could do is go into your final with a permanent kind of color system, color pencils, watercolors, whatever it may be, and realize, oh, I don't like this. The colors don't look right. I'm really, I want to start over, and then you have to actually start from scratch, and that's a lot for you guys to take on. So I'd rather you practice on your first draft to make sure you like it, and then see where it goes. All right, so hopefully you're getting the picture. I was going to do this in time-lapse mode, but I want to have you actually see live time how I work. So, it's not, this is going to look very different by the time I'm done. This is just me mapping out those colors in a very loose format. Eventually I will get back in there and do a lot more detail. You see these little glowing bubbles, right? I'm actually going to paint right through them for now because, again, this is acrylic paint and I can paint over. Some of you that are more detail oriented, I know I have a lot of students that really like adding a lot of detail. This style might not be the way you want to go. Sometimes kids don't like painting over something. So I'm going to keep it messy and freeform for now. And then when I go back and I'm working into my final details, I would make sure to neaten things up, keep things a little less messy. And again, I'm adding some of these dark shadows here, because if I have the light coming in from the doorway like this, right? This area is going to be where the light is streaming in, and these areas are going to be that cool blue for the shadow. Okay? All right, last thing I'm going to do is just find some space to map out my lights. I want to make sure my brush is super clean, because if I mix my, I'm going to be using a little bit of a yellow, a nice warm yellow. This is a nice cadmium yellow hue. So I'm going to be using that for my light. I'm going to water it down, but because I already have this blue going on here, adding the yellow is going to make green if I don't rinse out my brush properly. So I really want to make sure I clean it out. Even if it's a little bit green, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. You just want to kind of map it out in general. This is a little too bright for me. It's nice to have that kind of glowing sense, but it's a little overwhelming, so I'm actually going to water it down. I already added the water, but I'm going to add a little bit of white paint too, just to make it a little bit lighter. And white is one of the colors I use a lot for tinting, which means making a color lighter. So sometimes it takes a little bit to get out of the tube, but that's fine. All right, so I'm going to add some of my white paint. There we go. That's a nice color. Okay, so I have this nice pale color. I actually got a little bit of red on my brush by mistake, but I think that actually looks really pretty. So I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go in and paint the whole thing this nice bright yellow, maybe with a little bit of that pink tinge to it. I think that looks really pretty. I am using a board that I often paint on, so I'm not worried about getting paint on my surface. If you are not painting, or if you're painting on like your kitchen table or something, please make sure you spread out newspapers or old magazines. Put something underneath, or a sheet of cardboard that nobody cares about. Put something underneath your work so that you do not get paint all over your furniture, because that is not going to make anybody happy. So I'm going to just map out my basic colors again, and for the next week I'm going to be thinking about what else I need to do here. Okay, so you are only required to do half of your work this week. The other finishing touches, so right now I have everything mapped out. My finishing touches will be done the following week. I want to make sure that I'm taking my time to get this done, but that I'm not, I don't want to finish it because I want to make sure that you guys have time to get feedback. So I'm going to be giving you some feedback. If you want to get feedback from your family or friends, that's fine too, but I want to make sure you have someone who gives you feedback before you move on to your final. Well, this is your final, but your final.